I'm Nicholeen Peck, and I teach all over the world about parenting, good communication, how to build strong family bonds, child development, and education. And in this video, we're talking about how to teach a dyslexic child to read. In this video, I'm going to be sharing with you some stories of dyslexia in my family, how I helped two of my dyslexic children learn to read, and what some key things are that you can do to make reading light bulbs go on. I was probably dyslexic. I didn't know that at the time when I was young, but after raising two dyslexic children and seeing so many similarities with the way they learned for how I remember learning to read, I realized I likely was dyslexic too. Now, there is kind of a spectrum with dyslexia. There's some people who have like dyslexia, dysgraphia. There's some people who are mildly dyslexic. There's just kind of a whole bunch of area where each person's situation really is unique to them. And I think this is why people struggle with dyslexia and trying to help a person with dyslexia learn to read and just to overcome some of the hurdles that can be presented by that dyslexia, because each person's situation is just slightly different. There are so many resources and things that people have out there for people with dyslexia, you know, from different colors to lay over the page, to different processes to have the brain go through to see if it can get formatted to, you know, do better. What I've realized is that we're trying to take a method of learning reading that has been established for, I don't know, a long time, or whatever the current method is, let's say, and then we're trying to take some other little like accessory to add to it, and it's just not always successful. In fact, it's kind of rarely successful for people, and this is because it's probably not as much to do with the accessory that you add to the reading as it is to the actual method of reading instruction itself. So as a parent who raised multiple foster children as well as my own 4 children, and having homeschooled my 4 children and taught them all how to read, and 2 of them being dyslexic, I do know that there are better ways to teach reading than others. So let me share with you my story of teaching children to read. My 2 oldest biological children were really early readers, really fast readers. They started learning to read when they were 3 years old. By the time they were 5 years old, they could read a King James version of the Bible and understand it. They were so good at reading and excelled so much. And I remember as a mother just thinking, wow, that was almost effortless. I hardly had to do anything. I did this little approach to reading. It was called the Lynn Hansen method of reading. It's now called Skyrocket Learning. You can find the method at skyrocketlearning.com. I felt like, well, anybody can absolutely, you know, just learn to read so easily. I guess I really had a hard time when I was young. And that's when I started thinking maybe something was wrong with me with my learning, and I never knew because they just kept passing me along and it just kept coming slowly, slowly, slowly. But the words and things just had a hard time coming together in my head. Then I had my 3rd child and my 4th child. And my 3rd and 4th children both also wanted to start to learn how to read when they were 3 years old. And I thought, no problem. We're going to do the same approach. This Lynn Hansen method, which is the Skyrocket Learning method. I thought this will be easy. I've already done this 2 other times, and not only with my children, but I had taught other people in the neighborhood their children how to read. Even school teachers had come to me and said, will you teach my children to read? And I used this same method every time, and it was incredibly effective. In fact, I have other videos here on the channel about some of the songs and things that are part of that old Lynn Hansen, or now we would call it the Skyrocket Learning method of reading, and I highly recommend going and looking at those things and going to skyrocketlearning.com. So I felt super confident. Well, then we went through the same process that I did with my 2 older children who were so good at reading, and it didn't get the same results. In fact, it was like, okay, I think I get this and I've learned the lesson, and then they couldn't get it. And it was to the point with my daughter, my third child, that she would make something. She would say, look, Mom, I drew my own computer keyboard. And she would write all the letters backwards. She would write the word backspace completely backwards, letters backwards, direction backwards for the word. So she was looking at it, copying it, writing it the totally other way. Now, she was a left-handed writer, and that might have had something to do with it, because it was easier for her to see her letters as she would move the other direction on a page, because writing and reading don't necessarily correlate, okay? But I just remember going, that is a lot of brain talent right there. We got a really smart person on our hands, but they are completely flip-flopped on everything. And with the reading, she wanted to start reading when she was 3. We went through some of the same processes, and then she couldn't get it. We sat down to do the word lists, because we started with word lists before we moved to little books like Bob books, and really Skyrocket Learning has its own little books that fit the rules just perfectly, with the little songs and stuff like that they teach, which were amazing. And she could get the songs and she could diagram a word, but when it got to it, she would lose track of which direction she was going on the page. And she just had a lot of frustration, but bless her heart, she just kept going. Now, there was something that Lynn Hansen did that I loved, and this was that she would, when she would teach the children how to read their letters or how to write their letters, she would put at the left side, I guess for you it's this side, at the left side of every page, she would put a little truck. She would draw a truck on the lines to whatever words it was, and then she would say, now drive your truck. And you have to drive your truck across the page the same way every time. The truck cannot drive this way. It has to drive this way. That made a huge difference for my dyslexic readers. Now, were they still slower to read? Absolutely. Where I had the first 2 reading the Holy Bible by the time they were 5, the last 2 were not really up to speed on their reading until they hit about age 9 or 10. And even then they were a little behind, but then they shot ahead, and both of them, by the time they were 16 years old, they were starting university. They ended up, both of them, in university having straight A's. My youngest is still in there, so we don't know if he's going to graduate with practically a 4.0 like his sister did. You know what is amazing? She designs buildings, iconic buildings, buildings that will be known in photographs all over the world. And she was good at sewing and creating and, her brain puzzles. Her brain was so good at putting all the pieces together. She could see the whole myriad of things and then see how it fits together to create functionality. Her dyslexic brain, being able to see from all these different angles, definitely is for her. It is meant to be. It's absolutely meant to be. It's part of her genius. But in order to get the reading right was so difficult. And that little truck, okay, the truck drives this way. Drive your truck, London, I would say. And when she'd drive the truck, and then as she drove the little truck across the page, then she would go, okay, I'm driving this way, so I have to remember the words go this way, the letters go this way. As I'm sounding it out, I go this way, not this way. And that made a big, big difference for her. Another thing that Lynn did as far as letters and letter recognition was she gave the letters different pictures. So each letter could be turned into a little picture. So for instance, like a P. P is pull, pop, pull, pop. And so there was this little image on there for the P of doing this pull down and a pop. And so you could remember pull, pop, that's a pull pop. And then the bear, like a lowercase b, you would drive your truck and you hit the back of a bear, because this was the bear's belly, the back of the bear, and the belly, bear, right? And so she helped them learn their letters. It took us much more time. I had to be very patient. I never told them that there was anything wrong with their reading. They assumed that, well, we started at age 3, and we know our older brother and sister started at age 3, so we must be just as smart as them. They never knew that they had any difference in their reading abilities. When my daughter London got to university, she actually did a class on child development, and they were talking about her her childhood, and she was supposed to call and interview me about her childhood and stuff. So, here she is, 18, right? I say, well, with your reading, and because she asked about academics, and I said, well, your reading, it took a while because you were dyslexic. And she's like, wait, what? I was dyslexic? And I said, oh yes, you were definitely dyslexic. And she's like, I didn't even know that. And then she paused and she said, Mom, if I would have been in public school, I would have thought I was stupid. I'm so glad you never told me that. And I was like, yeah. I was really glad I had homeschooled, especially with those dyslexic children. They never knew that they were different, behind, nothing like that. I just trusted in the process of learning and that they would get there. And I made it so that there was never any anxiety or stress. We just practiced every day. So what did we practice every day? Let's talk about that. So I'm hoping you're getting one of the first things that you need to know to teach your dyslexic child to read is do not talk about dyslexia. Do not make it like it's something different. Start them reading at the time everybody else is starting and then just carry on because it takes them a lot more time to get it set right. They have to really train their eyes and train their brains to work a certain way across the page. Now, if you use skyrocketlearning.com and the resources there, I highly recommend it because a lot of the ways that you learn to read, instead of just trying to sound out things across the page, is to use these little songs, and they help them know what the vowels say. And so it's songs like A with a vowel after says A, E with a vowel after says E, and so forth. And then there's songs about the short vowel sounds and those types of things. So those little songs make it memorable. Then we learn how to diagram a little word using consonants and vowels and those little songs, and they get the word down. Now the memory part for dyslexic people is hard. Memorization is more difficult for people with dyslexia than for people who don't have dyslexia. And this is because just keeping things straight on the page is one thing, but then trying to remember it afterward, always being in that order, is a whole different thing. So just because they can diagram the word name does not mean when they read it at the top of a worksheet that it says name that they're going to immediately know what it says. So they have to work a little bit harder and it takes more time. So what I did was I sat down with the children and I would say, okay, we're going to read a book together. At first, we focused on the sounds of the letters. That's something you need to do for that Skyrocket Learning. I would have the book, and maybe it was like if you give a mouse a cookie, and I would be reading it, and every time we got to a letter M, I would stop and put my finger on the M, and they would have to say and then I would say mouse, and matters and make, and every time we got to M, they had to say the M, okay? That was the first thing, to get them to really understand that when you touch that letter, it has to say what it says. And I let them read with their fingers, touching everything all the time, because this was going to be helpful for them, especially because they had to remember that they had to flow in a certain direction. So then as they got a little bit better, starting to put it together a little bit more, then I would sit down and I would read with them each day. And I would have no stress about like if they missed a word or if they were having a hard time, I would say, oh, just drive your truck. Oh, okay. And they would stop back. Oh, yep, I got to drive my truck. I got to start on my left side. And so now I'm going to go through this word again. And it was no big deal, no stress. And I would always declare it a success afterward. Before we got to reading little books like that, we would make word lists. Word lists, where there's one word per line, big lines, is actually way easier than sentences at first for a dyslexic person. So we did word lists. Then we did the little books that were perfectly formatted to those songs that we learned from Lynn Hansen. And then we started reading other things, and I would say, read with your finger, and they would read aloud to me. If they ever got tired, because sometimes they get tired, then I would read aloud to them, but they had to point to the words on the page to keep my reading going. So this would make it so that they technically still had to read at the time. Now, there's one thing I gotta tell you about teaching your dyslexic child to read, and that is that sometimes because it's harder, they don't wanna do it. And sometimes you have to make them do it. Now, when my children first start to want to read when they're like 3 and 4 years old, I tell them, okay, I'll teach you, but you have to practice that. You have to promise me that if I teach you this, that every single day you'll read with mom. until you're so good at it that you can read every single day on your own. But once we learn it, we have to do it every day for the rest of our life. And they're like, yeah, I want to do it, because they see brother and sister doing it and loving it, and mom doing it and loving it, and they want to know. So I say, okay. So now they've promised. So if they get to a day they don't want to do it, I have to have a way to correct that. I have to have a skill. So they have a skill called following instructions that they learn. It has 5 steps to it. I'm not going to talk about it here because there's plenty of other videos, and my website goes into a lot of other detail about the 4 basic skills, and one of those is following instructions. So you can look at other videos here on this channel for that. If they don't do one of those 5 steps to following instructions, then I correct them. And there's a way to do a 7-step correct that's very effective, connective, loving, helps bring them back on track and feel like it's safe to be corrected. And that's another part of my self-government as a parent. This whole channel is about self-government. We're talking about reading today and helping children govern their reading and learn to have patience there, which the parent has to have first. But it all hinges on that parental self-government. If you think you might need a little bit more help with that parental self-government, peruse this channel. There are a lot of videos here that can really help you and your family have better success, not only in your reading, but in your relationships and your behaviors too.